Hey everyone, Dan here with HardlyBriefDev with the next part in our series where we are going to create a day-night cycle inside Unreal Engine and using blueprints. If you haven't watched the last video, be sure to check it out. The link will be at the top of this video. However, for a quick recap, in the last video we discussed the design of the system and we talked about how we could implement a central game time system that will allow us to create a day-night cycle. We're going to create this system using a reusable actor component, and then we'll attach it to a custom game state class. If you haven't heard what a game state class is, be sure to check out my short videos on Unreal Engine's gameplay framework. In this video, we're going to continue our efforts and we're going to add the functionality to control time, meaning we're going to be able to speed it up, slow it down, pause, and resume time in our game. We'll then create an interface that will allow us to more easily communicate with the central game time system from other actors in the game. And lastly, we'll add our first event to the system to set us up to complete the day-night cycle. But before we jump into the editor and continue building, please don't forget the project files are available to download on my Patreon. If you are new to Unreal Engine and you want to learn more, I do have a free course on Udemy that is perfect for new developers or those getting started in Unreal. All of those links and more are in the description below. Also, please like and subscribe for more content and let me know in the comments below what you'd like to learn next. For a quick recap, in the last video we created a timer. The timer handles our in-game time. We created a game time day in seconds, which is a variable that just tells us how long in real world time our in-game day will last. We then divide that value to create minutes, and then we divide it by our scale, and that ultimately sets the rate of how often our timer or this event from our timer will go off. That event is advancing our time, where that increments our minutes. It checks to make sure that our minutes are below 60. If not, we increment the hours, and the same thing for hours above 24. Then we'll go ahead and increment the day. You can continue this pattern if you want to add years, months, all that sort of thing. But in this case, this is what we're going to do for this series. So let's continue on and actually add the functionality that we talked about, where we can pause, resume, speed up, and slow down our in-game time. In the previous video, we talked about our design for this game time system, and we said we wanted to use a interface called the game time interface that will allow us to more easily communicate with our game time component. This interface is going to be implemented on the game state class, which we created at the end of the last video. Again, if you haven't checked that out, be sure you do, otherwise you might be a little lost. I'm back inside our project and we're going to create the game time interface. So I'm going to go to the content browser, right click, and I'm inside the blueprints folder. I'm going to say interface and we're going to look for blueprint interface. I'm going to label this BPI underscore game time interface. We'll double click to open this up. I will dock it so that we can look at it. And this looks like a very generic blueprint. It has a event graph here. It says it's read-only, and that's because interfaces, you don't implement functionality, you just create the function names and the signatures of them, and then each individual class that implements the interface will add the functionality they need. So the first thing that we're going to do is rename this new function. So I'm going to call this one pause game time. I'm going to add a new one that's going to be resume game time. And the other one is going to be update game time scale. So these are three functions that we know we want. We want to speed up or slow down our game time, and we're going to do that by game time scale. So we can use the update function here. And then we want to pause and resume our game time. So we need those two functions there. The last thing that we want to do before we leave this interface for now is on the update game time scale function, down here in details and the under inputs, we want to add a float value, which is going to be our new scale. And inside this, instead of Boolean, we're going to set this to a float. Hit compile and save, and now we'll go to our game state class. In the content drawer, I'll open up our BP game state. This is the custom game state class that we created last time. To add the interface, you'll go to class settings, and then where you see implemented interfaces, you can click add, type in BPI, and you can see game time interface. Now on the left-hand side, under my blueprint, you can see the three functions that we created: update game time scale, resume game time, and pause game time. These are the functions that we're going to use and be able to call from anywhere in our game to actually adjust and pause our time. Let's use these functions now. I'm going to double click pause game time and then double click resume game time. That's going to add these two events to our event graph on our game state. So off of pause, I'm going to say print text, and we're going to say paused game. Again, this is just to make sure it works. Paused game. I will Control C and V to copy and paste, connect it to resume game, and then instead of pause game, we will say resume game. So now that we've added this, we want to create a way to call these functions. And so we're going to do that inside our third person player. So go to the content drawer. You want to go to third person, blueprints, and double click the BP third person player. Inside this event graph, you can see where the enhanced input system is tied up for the third person template. Below this, we are going to add a couple debug keys to test out our pausing and resuming and speeding up time. So right click and type in keyboard P. This will give us an event that will trigger when we hit P on our keyboard. From here, we're going to type in flip flop. This will allow us to kind of flip between two actions. It has a Boolean value stored inside this macro, and it will allow us to go between basically on or off. So for A, the first time we want to do this, we want to call our interface function called pause time. The way we're going to do that is right click, say game state, and get game state. From here, we can call pause game time. Connect the A pin to the input of our pause game time. You can see that pause game time has a message symbol or an envelope, and this symbol indicates that this is a interface function. You can also see it says target is BPI game time interface. What this tells us as a programmer or game designer is that this function is going to attempt to be called. If it's not implemented on the game state object that is part of get game state, then nothing will happen. It will fail gracefully. If it does exist, then it will run whatever logic is on the game state function, which in our case is the print text of pause game. So now off the B pin, we want to call a similar function, which is resume game time. So we'll type in resume game time. It's going to look very similar to our pause game time. And now if I compile and save, we can actually test this out. Before we test it out, let's go back to our BP game time component, and inside our sequence where we go then one, where we're printing, we want to disable this text because it's going to be printing so often that we might miss the messages. So I'm just going to highlight this with my mouse cursor, hold Alt on my keyboard and click. We'll compile and save, and now we'll go back to our third person map. We know the time is running, and if I hit P on my keyboard, you're going to see pause game. I'll hit P again, and it says resume game. So we know we're communicating through an interface, and we're communicating from our keyboard to an interface and then calling a specific or running some specific logic that's on our game state. So now let's actually implement the functionality to pause our game. Let's go inside our game time component, and under our advanced time, I'm going to right click and say custom event. Here, we're going to say pause game time. What we want to do when we pause our game time is just clear our timer. We're just going to stop the timer. And we already have that up here. So I can actually copy this, come down here and paste it. What this will do is it will stop the advanced time event from running, and it will clear out our timer. That means when we resume our game, we need to reestablish our timer. So back under pause game time, we are going to right click and we are going to say add custom event. We're going to say resume game time. And off of this event, we are just going to say, so set game time timer. So when we pause the game, we're going to clear our timer. This is going to stop the events from firing. When we resume our game, we are just going to reset our timer and recalculate how often our event should tick, just in case the time scale has changed in between us resetting the time. This will cause the advanced time event to continue running, and our time will increment like normal. So let's go ahead and test this out. I'm going to connect the then pin back to our formatted text so that we can see it in the log, and then we are going to compile and save. We need to, before we actually play test though, we need to connect it in our game state. So let's jump into our BP_game state. After we print our text to the screen for pause and resume, we're then going to call the functions that are on our game time component. So under components, I'm going to click and drag BP game time component. Off this, I'm going to say pause game time. Be sure to call the function that's attached to this and not the interface. So here we're saying BP game time, pause game time. This is the function in the event graph we just created. I'm going to copy this, Control C, and then paste it with Control V, drag this off and say resume game time. Again, look for the one that says call function, not the interface. Connect that. And now we should be able to fully test out our pausing and resuming time. So compile, save, go back to the third person map, press play. You can see your time is incrementing. I'm going to press P and it says pause game. And you can see that our time has stopped incrementing. Now I can hit P again and our time continues where it left off. So it's working as intended. Now, the next thing we want to do is be able to update our time scale, meaning speed up or slow down our in-game time. And we're going to be doing the exact same thing where we create the functionality inside our component. We then add the call to that function from our component into our game state, and we can create a couple inputs on our BP third person character to actually slow down and speed up time. I'm inside the BP third person character, and below the P, we want to add a 1 and 2 button press so that we can actually slow down our time. So I'm going to right click and type in keyboard 1. I'll do the same thing again, keyboard and 2. This will give me access to the 1 and 2 key on my keyboard. Click and highlight the game state, copy and paste it, put it in the center here so that we both can use it. And off this, I want to say update game time scale. So we want update game time scale. We're going to connect the press pin to that pin. I'm going to highlight Control C and V to paste it and connect the 2 pin. Again, connect the return value of our get game state to the target. And now we can adjust our time scale. So when we hit 1, we want the game to slow down. And then when we hit 2, we want the game to speed up. And the way we're going to do that is by adjusting the scale value. We said the first one is going to be our slow game time. So I'm actually going to highlight the 2 and hit C on my keyboard and say slow down game time. And for scale, we're going to set this to 0.01. Then for 2, I'm going to highlight both of those, hit C on my keyboard and say speed up game time. And for this one, I'm going to set to 10. Now, this is adjustable. You can customize it for your project. I'm going to highlight our comment box, move it down, click the game state, move it down, just to keep us a little bit more organized. Highlight all of it, bring it down. And now when we hit 1 on our keyboard, we're going to slow our game time. When we hit 2, we are going to speed it up. And we need to add one more, which is updating our time scale back to normal, which we can set at being 3. So we'll say keyboard. Obviously, I didn't think this through too much, but we'll set it to 3. And we will copy game time state, update our game time scale, get the game time state, copy and paste that down here. We'll connect the return to the target and we'll set our update new scale to 1. I will highlight all this, hit C on my keyboard and type in set, let's say normal speed game time. All right, so to recap, when we hit 1, we're going to slow down. When we hit 2, we're going to speed up. And when we hit 3, we'll go back to our normal time. So compile and save. And now that we've added the calls to the interface, we actually need to add the functionality in our game time component. So inside our game time component, underneath our pause and resume game time, I'm going to create a new custom event. So we'll say custom event. We'll call this update game time scale. From here, we are going to pause our game time. We want to clear the timer. So we're going to say pause game time. This just invalidates our timer. We then want to set our new scale, which we can do by going under our game time in the blueprints, the variables. Hold Alt on our keyboard, click game time scale. We want to set it to a new value. Well, before we do that, this update game time scale event needs an input. So under details, we can click input. We'll say new scale. Let me drag this out a bit. We'll change this to a float value. And we can drag this float value to our new time scale, hit set or connect the pins for set. So now we're setting our new time scale. And last but not least, we want to resume our game. So I'll say resume game time, the function. And what that will do is it will restart our timer with our new scale value. Pretty simple. So compile and save. Let's go to our game state class and connect the interface functions so that we can test this out in game. So go to our BP game state. On the left-hand side under my blueprint, click the update game time scale. That adds the event to our event graph. I'm going to go up here, click and copy the BP game time component, Control V to paste. Off this, we want to say update time scale. Again, get the one that says call function. Connect the pins, connect the new scale, and now we should be able to test it out in game. So let's go to third person map, press play. I'm going to hit 1 on my keyboard, and you can see the time is basically stopped. It's slowed down quite a lot. If I hit 2, it's going to speed up really fast. It's whipping through, and if I hit 3, it's going to resume its normal time. So now we can slow down time, we can speed up time, we can resume normal time, or we can just pause our time and then resume it. And those are the core functionality of a game time component that we really wanted to add. The last thing that we want to do is add an event, and it's our first event for this series. And in the first video, we talked about how we want to add a bunch of different events to allow other actors and other components to understand when our game time updates, changes, any sort of major timing event can be broadcasted. And we're going to add our first one that's just going to tell everything in the game world that a new day has occurred or started. So in our BP game time component, under the event dispatchers, we can go ahead and add such an event. So I'm going to click the plus button, and here I will say on game time, on new game time day. And under details, we can add some input data or data that will go along with this event as it's broadcasted. And so I'm going to click the plus button, and we will say current day count, and we will set this to an integer. This will allow us to just communicate what number day that we're on. So I will click and drag this into our event graph and click call. I'm on the advanced time function that we created at the very end when we increment our day. When we increment our day, we know a new day is occurring, and so that we can connect and call our on new game time day. So here I'm calling it. We need to connect the current day count, so I can just do this off this green pin as part of our increment. And now every time a new day or a day's increment, right, a new day occurs, we're going to call on new game time day. It's going to pass the current day count, and other objects can subscribe to this and listen to this and change how they operate. So the way we're going to show this is by going to game state. So let's go to our BP game state class. I just want to show you that this works, and then in the next video, when we actually build the day-night cycle, we're going to use events to trigger the changing of the scene. So inside our BP game state, off our event begin play, this is the event that gets started as soon as our game plays, this actor is loaded. We are going to go to our BP game state component, click and drag that. We're going to say bind to on new game time day. This is going to allow us to respond to this event when it gets fired with a custom event. So off the red event pin, we're going to say create, in the search bar, we're going to say create event. Here, we're going to say select function, and we're going to say create matching event. And down here, we're going to say on new game time day. And you can see it created a input for us, which is our current day count. So off this pin, we're going to say print text. We'll connect our day count. Let's actually format it again. So off the in text pin, we'll say format text. Here we'll say new day, and we'll say day count. Connect our current day count to the day count pin. We're going to customize this text a little bit. We're going to make it last for about 10 seconds. We'll change it to orange. And now we should be able to more easily see it as a new day goes by. So once we've added the event, we've added this custom implementation that we've added the functionality that gets called when a new game day occurs. Let's test it out. So we're gonna press play. We'll hit 2 to speed up our time, hit 1 to slow it down, hit P to pause, and you can see that it says new day 1. So we know that our event was communicated, broadcasted from our game time component, from our call new game time day. Here, our game state was listening for it, and it called its own function called new game time day. Here where we just broadcasted a formatted text. So what we're going to do though is create more events and then tie in a actual visual representation of our day-night cycle, meaning like it's going to get darker, the light's going to change, the colors are going to change, and then anything else in your game world can respond to these same exact events. And they don't need to know that it comes from this game time component. They can actually just listen to it from our game state class, which makes it super great and simple and decoupled from the rest of our systems. So that's going to be in the next video. We're going to create and finish our day-night cycle. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.